Hey guys, we're going to do another video today, and this is going to be the jump animations video. If you've been following along, this is the third in a series where we have been building up using ground checks and basic animations, and now we're up to the point where we're adding jumps to our characters, and we're using a method where we're taking in some information based on whether our character is on ground, and then the velocity value, because we want to play two separate sets of animations, one that shows our character going up and one of our characters going down. We're going to make a separate video which uses blend tree method, part of Unity's mechanism system, which is slightly more elaborate, but we're using something more similar to the video that we made for animations. And so if you haven't seen the basic animations video that I put out, then go ahead and watch that right now. That'll help you get caught up. We're using the same code base and we're using the same sprite sheet. So if you've been following along, then you should be already on track. And we're going to lastly use a script, which is going to tie this all together and talk to the animator based on our on-ground state and our vertical velocity. And we're going to tie this in to our jump script. So this whole time I've been keeping our movement, our horizontal movement and our jump movement separate. If in the end you want to put these two together, that's totally fine. There's no right or wrong way of doing that as long as it's making sense to you. I like to keep these two separate because maybe in a game you don't have jumping, or in a game you do have jumping. It's okay to have these two actions separate, but I'll show you how to do it if you want to keep them separate. And we're going to be altering our jump script in this tutorial. Great, so why don't we just go into that. I'm going to show you a couple examples. Previously, you might have played Super Mario Bros. And originally, there was only one single sprite. You can see in Small Mario, there's the arm in the air. The other one was Big Mario with mushroom, arm in the air, flower power mushroom, arm in the air. And we can see from more elaborate Marios that they can have multiple sprites in a single animation, where maybe he's jumping and twisting, shooting something, doing backflips. All those types of things have gotten a lot more elaborate. And we can see from, let me pull up Chrome, we have, again, these are the single frame jumping animations or sprites that represent it going up and going down. Regional Mario, no matter what type of movement, when there's jumping, it's just one single frame. Of course, it's translating sometimes, but there's no alteration in whether or not they're going up or going back down. So why don't we start implementing our two animation system for jumps, and this is going to be based on whether or not they're on ground versus off ground, and we're going to be using vertical velocity. So let's go back into Unity, and maybe your project looks similar to what we've been doing. We're using the same code base and sprite sheets that we were using in previous videos. If you haven't watched those again, I'm going to throw the link up right now. You can pause and go to see those videos. But we're going to build on what we've had before. I have a character named Bob, and Bob has an idle and a walk. We want to make sure that the two movement scripts that we're using, the basic movement platform and the jump demo, are properly set up. We want to make sure that our facing is turned on. Set a speed, something around 10. We want to select a jump button, and for me, it's going to be spacebar. The number of jumps is going to be changing depending on how many jumps we have. And depending on the world space that you're using, the scaling and the gravity scale, I'm using the default negative 9.8. You might change this jump force to be something that's different than 300. You don't need to have that. Falling gravity, this is a value that I change when the character is falling. And so when I detect that the relative rigid body velocity in the y-axis is negative, then I increase the gravity scale felt on this rigid body just so that it falls a little bit faster and then jumps. Can jump and on ground are going to be factors that we use detection, collision detection for, so those will change automatically. And the jump limit is going to be up to you, whether you want a double jump, triple jump, single jump ability. Change that to the appropriate number that you have there. So let's go ahead and check that out. We should see that Bob, when I press spacebar, is going to be jumping. And when I press the arrow keys or the A and D keys, that the character starts walking and is playing its walking animation. Great. So now we're ready to implement the jump animations that we've been dealing with. We're going to be using two animation clips in this case. One's going to be representing the jump and one's going to represent the fall. So make sure that we have Bob selected, and then we can pull up our Animator window and our animation window. If you forgot where to find those things, we can go to the top menu bar, hit select window, go to animation, and that's going to bring up this window, which is our timeline. And the other window is Animator. We select Animation, Animator, and this is going to bring up this window. Of course, these things can be redocked and pulled to different spots. I like to keep the animation up here. We're going to change the timeline, and then separately, I have the Animator, which allows me to see the clips and the transitions. So we're going to deal with the animation window first. Make sure that we have Bob selected, and we're going to create a new clip by going to the drop-down menu and selecting Create New Clip. It's going to ask me in the File dialog window to name the clip that I want to have. I'm going to call this Bob Jump. And I'm going to immediately create another one called Bob Fall. Go back to Bob Jump, and from my sprite sheet, you should have already incorporated it already. If you haven't, I'll talk you through this real fast. Drag it into your project window, go to wherever it is. For me, it's going to be my platform sprites, and it's this sprite sheet right here. If you want to cut this up and you haven't done this already, go to your sprite editor. Make sure the sprite mode is set to multiple and hit apply. Go to sprite editor, select on that. It's going to bring up this window. And the way that you can slice this easily is go to slice, change it to cell size, and I made it an awkward size. It's going to be 60 by 60, and we can go to the pivot point to be bottom. Hit slice. We can see that it's cut up like that. Make sure we hit apply, and all of these slices should be properly set. Let's just make sure that I didn't alter anything with Bob. Everything looks right. And for my Bob jump animation, make sure that we have Bob selected. I'm going to be using this single frame, and that's going to be Skelly sheet, and the slice number is going to be 18. I'll drag it into my timeline. I should see it here. If I hit play in the animation window, you should see that renderer plays that single frame right there. Great, that's the single frame that we're looking for, and we'll go back into Bob Fall, and we're going to drag in Skelly sheet, and it's going to be the 19th frame. If we hit it play in the animation window, we should see that it looks like this. So when Bob jumps, it'll look like this sprite, and when Bob is falling, then it should look like this sprite, bringing the sword down. Great, so we have these two animation clips saved. We can now go to the Animator window, which controls our which clip gets played. If you forgot how to navigate this Animator window, we can resize it. And the way to get around it, if you can't see all of these clips, and sometimes you can't, you can third mouse click or Alt and single mouse click to navigate this space, as if you were in some type of different editor like Blender or something like that. We can see these two animation clips that we've brought in, and let's just sort of arrange it, and let's create a mental map to make sense of why we'll position them here. Of course, we can put them anywhere we want, but let's just put them in this sense, in that these two animation clips represent the idle and walk when the character is on the ground, and these two represent the two animations when the character is off the ground. One is going to be the jump and one is going to be the fall. If we quickly go back to our original slide, we said that we wanted to have it so that we're basing these two animations on our on-ground state and our vertical velocity state. And to be more specific, we want to be jumping and falling, let's say jumping and falling when off ground or on ground equals false, or not on ground, let's do it like that, when we're not on ground, and our vertical velocity is non-zero. So we're going to be jumping when our velocity is positive And we're going to be falling when our velocity is negative. Falling when our velocity is negative. So let's make that happen. We'll go back into Unity, and we need to create some transitions to move from idle to walk. And I've created two already parameters that represent that. One is going to be the on ground and vertical value. Let's go ahead and delete these things so that you can get some practice doing that. So we already have this from our previous video, and we need to have two animator parameters that represent that type of data that we're going to be expecting from our script. If we hit plus, then we're going to select bool, and this is going to represent our on ground state of our character. And then the second one is going to be another float, and this is going to represent our vertical value, whether our character is going to be falling or jumping, and that's going to be a float. So now we have two parameters, and now we can base our transitions between these four animation clips. Let's start from idle, and we can say that if our character is idling, we will likely transition from idle to a jump, and so we can make a transition, move to our jump. And then when we're jumping in the air, we'll likely go up, and then whatever goes up must come down, and so we'll have a transition from our jump to our fall. From our fall, we'll likely come back into an idle when we eventually hit the ground. Lastly, if we have more than one jump, we might be falling and then jumping again before we hit the ground. And so let's come back and add another transition there. Now that we have these four transitions, and we can add additional ones from our walk. If we happen to be walking and then jumping, we'll do that in a second. But let's create the conditions for these transitions. So when we're idling and then we go to jump, we need to have a condition for when we start off on the ground, and then now we're off the ground. So when we're on the ground, we want to be jumping when we're off the ground. And then once we're in the air somehow, we want to say that we're moving from a jump to a fall when our vertical value is less than 0. We might come back into jumping if our vertical velocity is greater than 0. When we're going upwards, our vertical velocity is going to be positive. And then when we are in some falling action, we go back into idle if we change our state from on ground to be true. I hope that makes sense. Let's go back into our code now, and let's see how we make our animator parameters receive the information about all of that information that we talked about. We said two things. One, again, is our on-ground state and our vertical velocity. In this case with Bob, all of that information should be happening from our jump demo script because we have our on-ground state being controlled in that script, all right? So we already have some information about being on ground, and we need to somehow get that over to our animator component. Let me just move this window so that we can see some information here. So we need to send our rigid body's information. Where's our rigid body? Here's our rigid body. And that rigid body needs to tell our animator whether we're going up or going down. And then we also have this demo script that has an on-ground Boolean data type that we should be telling the animator whether we're on ground or not. And so we can mediate all of those things inside our jump demo script. In order to do that, our jump demo script needs to get access to our rigid body. And so we're going to create a reference to our rigid body, which we've already done here. And then we grab the reference to the rigid body upon awake. So these two lines are already in our jump demo script. That's great. And so now we need to update the animator with our on-ground state. We know that we change our on-ground states in the on-trigger exit, on-trigger enter codes when we hit an object with a tag of ground, then we change our on-ground state to be true. And if we leave an object with a tag called ground, then we consider ourselves to be on ground to be false. And so the code, the script knows it, but the animator doesn't know it yet. So how do we do that? We should be calling that information somewhere in our code. And so we can do that. We can do that around here. or we can do it in fixed update. Why don't we do that here? We'll do this in fixed update. And so we are going to, let's do this here. So we're going to update the animator. No, we'll do an update. Why am I doing a fixed update? We should call this animate. We're going to call animate, which is a function that we haven't written yet. And let's call animate right here, void animate. And what animate is going to do is we are going to get the information about our on-ground state, and we're going to tell the animator, hey animator, lowercase a animator. Do we call it animator? We called it, oh, we don't have a reference to animator. So let's grab a reference to animator right here. So we're going to say private animator, lowercase a animator, animator. And then we're going to grab the reference to it. Here, we use get component, and the component that we're looking for is the type of animator. Great, and we're going to throw that over here, cache it to the animator reference variable. So now when we call this animate method, we're going to tell the animator, hey animator, we're going to set a bool of, that's going to be called on ground. That's going to let us, the animator, know whether or not we are on ground. So there's going to be, we're referencing the parameter, and we're going to be setting it based on our own variable that happens to also be called on ground. It's spelled a little bit different. So it's going to send the animator our on ground state. And we can test that there. So make sure that we're calling animate in update. There it is. And we can test this out. So what we're looking for is this little checkbox to be either checked when we're on the ground and should be unchecked when we're off the ground. So that didn't work. What's going on there? We can go to our code. Animator set bool on ground. What is our state? If we look at our character, I know what's going on. So our object, is our platform tagged ground? Nope. So our code is looking for an object called ground. And since it wasn't set on ground, it didn't know that we're actually on the ground object. And so now when we're on here, we can see that our on ground state for our jump code is true, and it's getting translated over to our animator on ground. And when we hit jump, we should be leaving our idle and into our jump factor. You can see that as soon as I left on ground, the logic said that if we move from on ground from true to false, we should be moving into our jump animation, which is great. That's what we wanted. And then we said that we should transition over to our fall when our vertical value turns negative or less than 0. You can see that here. But the code is not using that yet. So we need to update our code. I'm going to update a line in our animate function to tell the animator, hey, now we're going to be setting a float value, and we're going to associate with that with the vertical value parameter that we have here. So we need to spell vertical value the way that we spelled it here. If we don't spell it right, then it's going to get mixed up. Put that in quotes, and then we need to send it the value that we have for our vertical value. And what that could be is we can just simply write out rb.velocity.y. We're not multiplying by any value right now, but since we have a reference to our rigid body, we can access its velocity parameter in the y-axis. So we should be able to see these values change when we jump or when we press the jump button. And we can see the action going from idle, we're stuck on the ground. As soon as I hit jump, we should go into bob jump. And when it reaches its peak and falls down, we should see it go into bob fall. Right now, you can see a bit of delay, and we addressed that in our previous video because right now we have an exit time, which is causing a delay in the transition from one animation to the next. And the way that I solve this is unchecking has exit time, unchecking fixed duration, and setting the transition duration to 0. And that allows our transitions to immediately snap from one to the next. If we do that with the rest of our transitions by unchecking has exit time, unchecking fixed duration, setting our transition duration to 0, for all of these, we should see the response time to appear more snappy. So let's hit play again, and let's see what that looks like. And we can see the action from here. The character is idling. I'm going to hit jump. It's playing a jump, and when it falls, then we can see the slash coming down. And then as soon as we land, we're back in idle. It seems like it's working. So that doesn't bring the sword down until it's falling back down. It remains in that until it's coming back down. We can see that we're getting this vertical velocity be 0 and then negative when it starts falling, and then as soon as it's back on ground, then we're back in idle. And we can move between, let's say that we're moving sideways. Let's see. Let's see if we are, what happens when we're actively moving left and right. If we can get, so right now when we're in walk, we're having a tough time getting into our jump. So we should be making some transitions over to that space. And then I'd say that we're done. We would move, if we're walking, then we should be able to get into our jump. And that condition should be the same thing, is that if we happen to be off the ground, then we should move into our jump. If you want to make things be more robust, then I suggest that we could also add the second condition to say that if our vertical velocity is greater than 0, then we should go into the jump. And then if we are falling, then we can quickly get into our fall by going from our on ground to be false, and then our vertical value to be less than 0. So what if we happen to fall off our platform? Then we can easily get into our fall by saying that our vertical velocity is 0 and we have to be off ground. See that happening there. If we are moving horizontally and then we jump, then we are also going to be off ground. That seems to be working. Great. I hope this video was helpful. We're going to get into blend trees in the next following video. I'm going to post all the sprites that we used in this video in the description, as well as the code that we use. Great. I hope this video was helpful. I'll see you guys later.